Hello, seventh period. So this is the audio recording of the reading homework that's due on Friday. So I'm recording this one in three segments. The first segment is from page 108 to 119. Reminder that you need to do your annotations. Use the format in the reading and the assignment sheet I gave you. Okay, page 108. Shukov got in a sweat. He hadn't put up his leveling string yet. He figured he'd put it high enough for 3 rows at once and come to spare. And to make things easier for Senka, he took part of the outside row and left him a little of the inside. While he was putting up the string, he told Senka with words and signs where to start laying. He got it deaf as he was. He bit his lip and squinted over at the boss's wall as if to say, "We'll show them. We'll keep up with them," and he laughed. Now they were bringing the mortar up the ladder. There would be 8 men on the job, working in twos. The boss told them not to put troughs with mortar near the bricklayers. The mortar would only freeze before they got used to it. But to have the stuff brought out to hand in the hod so they could take it out right away 2 at a time and slap it on the walls. And so the guys who brought up the hods wouldn't stand around freezing up here on top. They would carry bricks over to the layers, and when their hods were empty, the next 2 came up from down below without wasting any time, and the first 2 went down again. Then they thawed out their hod by the stove to get the frozen mortar off it and try to get as warm as they could themselves. 2 hods came up together, one for Gilgas's wall and the other for Shukov's. The mortar was steaming in the freezing cold, though there isn't much warmth in it. When you had slapped it on the wall with your trowel, you had to work quick so it wouldn't freeze. If it did, you couldn't get it off again, either with your trowel or the back of your gavel. And if you laid a brick a little out of place, it froze to the spot and stuck there. Then the only thing to do was pry it off with the back of the pick and hack the mortar away again. But Shukov never made a mistake. His bricks were always right in line. If one of them was broken or had a fault, Shukov spotted it right off the bat and found the place on the wall where it would fit. He'd scoop up some of the steaming mortar with his trowel, throw it on, and remember how the groove of the brick ran, so he'd get the next one on dead center. He always put on just enough mortar for each brick. Then he'd pick up a brick out of the pile, but with great care so he wouldn't get a hole in his mitten. They were pretty rough, these bricks. Then he'd level off the mortar with the trowel and drop the brick on top. He had to even it out fast and tap it in place with his trowel. If it wasn't right, so the outside wall would be straight as a die, and the bricks level both crossways and lengthways, and then they froze in place. If any mortar was squeezed out from under a brick, you had to scrape it off with the edge of your trowel as fast as you could and throw it away. In summer, you could use it for the next brick, but not in this weather. This could happen when you had a brick with a piece broken off the end, so you had to lay on a lot more mortar to fill in. You couldn't just lay a brick like that, but you had to slide it up to the next one, and that's when you'd get this extra mortar running out. He was hard at work now. Once he'd ironed out the snacks left by the guy who'd worked here before and laid a couple of rows of his own, it would be easy going, but right now he had to watch things like a hawk. He was working like crazy on the outside row to meet Senka halfway. Now Senka was getting closer to Shukov. He'd started together with the boss at the corner, but the boss was now going the other way. Shukov signaled the fellows carrying the hods to bring up the stuff to him on the double. He was so busy he didn't have time to wipe his nose. When he and Senka came together, they started taking mortar out of the same hod. There wasn't enough to go around. "Mortar!" Shukov yelled over the wall. "Here she comes," Pavlo shouted back. Another hod came along, and they used up what was still soft. But a lot of it was frozen to the sides, and they told the fellows to scrape it off themselves. There was no sense in carrying all the frozen stuff down again. "Okay, that's it. Next one." Shukov and the other bricklayers didn't feel the cold anymore. They were now going all out, and they were hot. The way you are at the start of a job like this, when you get soaking wet under your coat and jacket and both shirts. But they didn't stop for a second and went on working like crazy. After an hour, they got so hot the sweat dried on them. The main thing was they didn't get the cold in their feet. Nothing else mattered. The slight cutting wind didn't take their minds off the work. Only Klefshin kept banging one foot against the other. He wore a size 9, but each boot was a different size and both were tight. Turin kept shouting for more mortar, and so did Shukov. Any fellow who really worked hard always became a sort of gang boss for a time. The main thing for Shukov was not to lag behind, and for this he chased down his own brother up and down that ladder with the hod. At first it was the captain and Fetikov who carried the stuff up together. The ladder was steep and slippery, and for a time the captain went pretty slow. Shukov tried to push him a little. "Come on there, Captain, we need more bricks, Captain." But the captain got better all the time, and Fetikov got slacker and slacker. He kept tilting the hod, the son of a, and spilled some of the mortar to ease the load. Once Shukov gave him a poke in the back. "You lazy slob, I bet you really took it on the fellows in that factory you managed." Boss, the captain shouted, give me a man to work with. I can't go on with this blankhead. So Tyrion switched them around. He put Fetikov on the job, throwing bricks up to the scaffold in a place where they could see how much work he was doing. And he put Alosha with the captain. Alosha was a quiet fellow, and he took orders from anybody who felt like giving them. Full steam ahead, the captain shouted at him. Look at the way they're laying those bricks. Alosha gave him that meek smile of his. We have to go faster, let's go. Whatever you say. And they went down the ladder. A meek fellow like that is a real godsend in any gang. The boss shouted down to somebody. It seemed another truck with bricks had come. They hadn't brought a brick for 6 months, and now they were coming thick and fast. This was the time to work while they were still bringing them up. It was only the first day. If things got held up later on, they'd never get back in the swing of it. Down below, the boss was swearing again, something about the hoist. Shukov would have liked to find out what was going on, but he didn't have time. He was finishing off a row. A couple of the hodmen came up and told him an electrician had come to fix the mortar on the hoist. The foreman in charge of electrical work had come with him. He was a free worker, and he just stood looking while the electricians tinkered with the motor. That's how it always was. One fellow looked on while the other worked. If they could fix the hoist now, they could use it to bring up the bricks in the mortar. Shukov was ready on his third row of bricks, and so was Kokas, when another of those higher-ups, who were always looking over your shoulder, came up the ladder. This was the building foreman, Dur. He came from Moscow. They said he'd once worked in a ministry there. Shukov was standing close to Kilgus, and he jerked his thumb over Dur. Aha, Kilgus just shrugged. I don't have anything to do with that sort, but if he falls off the ladder, just call me. Dur would now sneak up behind them and watch them work. Shukov just couldn't stand those nosy guys. Dur was trying to rise in the world and get himself made an engineer, the damn swine. He'd once tried to show them how to lay bricks, and Shukov just laughed himself sick. To his and everyone else's way of thinking, you should build a house with your own hands before you started talking about being an engineer. In Shukov's home village, there were no stone houses, only wooden shacks, and the school was built of logs too. They got as much wood as they liked from the forest, but now in the camp he had to do a bricklayer's job. So okay, he did. Anybody who knew 2 trades could pick up a dozen more just like that. Shukov didn't fall off the ladder. He only tripped a couple of times. He almost ran up. Turin, he yelled, and his eyes were popping out of his head. Turin. Pavlo ran up the ladder after him with a shovel in his hands. Dur was wearing a quilted coat like everyone else in the camp, but it was new and clean. He had a good leather cap on his head, but he had a number on it like everybody else, B731. What is it? Turin came up to him with his trowel. His cap had slipped to one side and covered his eye. Something was up. Shukov didn't want to miss it, but the mortar was freezing in his hod. He kept right on working while he listened. What the hell is this? Dur bawled. He was foaming at the mouth. You'll get more than a stretch in the can for this. This is a criminal manner, Turin. You'll get another sentence for this on top of the 2 you already have. Now it hit Shukov what it was all about. He shot a glance at Kilgas. He had already caught on. It was the roofing felt. Darer had seen it on the windows. Shukov wasn't a bit worried about himself. His boss wouldn't give him away, but he was scarred for Turin. The boss was like a father to you, but to them he was nothing at all. Up here in the north, they were always slapping on new sentences for things like this. God, the way the boss's face twitched all over. The way he threw his trowel on the floor and went over to Dur. Dur looked around. Pavlo was standing there with his shovel up. He hadn't brought it up with him for nothing, and Senka, deaf as he was, had seen all what it was all about. And he came out with his hands on his hips. He was as strong as an ox. Dur started blinking. He was worried, and he looked closely around for a way out. The boss leaned over close to Dur and said kind of quiet, but so you could hear it from up there. Times have changed for scum like you, handing out new sentences. If you say a word, you bloodsucker, you won't be alive much longer. Get it? The boss was shaking all over, and he couldn't stop. And Pavel was looking murder at Dur. He had a face like a hawk. Take it easy, boys, take it easy, Dur said. He was all pale, and he edged away from the ladder a little. The boss didn't say another word. He straightened his cap, picked up his bent trowel, and went back to his wall. And Pavel went slowly downstairs again with his shovel, very slowly. Dur was scared to stay up here, and he was scared to go back down the ladder, too. He went and stood near Kilgas. Kilgas laid bricks like a druggist, weighing out medicine. He had a face like a doctor, and he was never in a rush. He stood with his back to Dur like he hadn't seen him. Dur sidled up to the boss. He was singing a different tune now. What do I say to the work supervisor, Turin? The boss went on laying bricks and didn't turn his head. Tell him it was there before. Say it was here when we came. Dur hung around a little longer. He saw they wouldn't kill him now. He walked up and down with his hands in his pockets. Hey, S854, he growled at Shukov. Why are you laying that mortar on so thin? He had to take it out on somebody. He couldn't find fault with anything else, so he picked up on the mortar. You might like to know, my dear sir, Shukov said through the gap in his teeth and leered at him. If I lay the stuff on thick now, this power plant will just melt away in the spring. Dur scowled. You're a bricklayer. You have to do what your foreman tells you. And he puffed up his cheeks the way he always did. Well, maybe Shukov was laying on a little thin in places, and it could be a little thicker, but only if you worked in the right weather, not in this freezing cold. They should have a heart, but all they think about is output. But how could you get this across to people who didn't have any brains? Dur took his time going down the ladder. You fix up that hoist for me, Turin shouted after him. What do you think we are, mules or something, hauling bricks up here by hand? You get a rate for haulage, Dur answered from the ladder, but he wasn't shouting anymore. You mean that crap in the rules and regulations about wheelbarrows for use of? I'd like to see you running a wheelbarrow up that ladder. Give us a rate. Hawes for the use of you. You don't think I'd mind, do you? Trouble is, the bookkeeping section wouldn't pass it. You and your damn bookkeepers. I've got the whole gang working here just to keep 4 bricklayers busy. What's it going to look like on the worksheet? He didn't stop laying bricks for a second time while he was saying all of this. Mortar, he shouted down. Mortar, Shukov shouted right after him. They'd finished up the 3rd row of bricks, and they could really get going on the 4th. He ought to raise the level of the string, but he didn't want to waste time, and he'd manage as it was and do the next row without it. Dur went across the compound. He was shivering and was going to the office to get warm. He hadn't felt too good up at the power plant. He should have thought twice before taking on a tough customer like Turin. He could have gotten along fine with gang bosses. He didn't have to kill himself working. He had a big ration and a room to himself, so what more did he want? He couldn't help throwing his weight around, acting smart. Somebody came up and said the electrician and the work supervisor had gone away and hadn't managed to fix up the hoist, so they just had to go on doing the work of mules. Shukov had been on lots of different jobs, and it was always the same story. Machines either broke down themselves or they were broken by the prisoners. He remembered how they'd broken the conveyor belt in the lumber camp. They put a stick in the works and pressed on it. They wanted a rest. You had to keep piling those logs on without a break. More bricks, more bricks, more bricks, the boss was yelling, and he told them to go screw their mothers, the whole damn bunch of them, the hod men and their fellows bringing the bricks. Pavel wants to know what to do about the mortar, they shouted up from below. How much more do you want? We've still got a half a trough down here. Well, give us another. Things were really moving fast now. They were on the 5th row of bricks. They'd had to bend double for the first one, and now the wall was up to their chests. It was easy enough with no windows and no doors, just 2 solid walls and all the bricks in the world. They should have put the string up higher, but it was too late. Kopchik spread the word that 82 had gone to hand and their tools. Turin looked murder at him. Get on with the job, you little squirt. Keep those bricks moving. Shukov looked around. Yeah, the sun was going down. It was all red, and there was a kind of gray haze around it. And just when they'd gotten into the stride, they were on the 5th row now, and that would be the last today. The fellows bringing the mortar were winded like horses. The captain looked kind of gray in the face. He was 40 after all, or thereabout. All right, guys, that ends the first segment of the reading homework. Ends the first segment of the reading homework. Don't forget to do your annotations. You need 4. God bless you.